Hello, everybody. Welcome to the United Stands. I'm Mark Goldbridge, and we are live talking the latest Manchester United transfer news with Ben Jacobs, who's in a skyscraper in New York. I actually think you're in like Stoke, but you can't prove it. Well, there's a curtain behind you. You could prove it. But how you doing, Ben?
Everything is good. Yeah, at the end of the show, I might have to prove I'm not in Stoke, but I am in New York, right on Times Square. So I'm sure you'll hear stag doos and loud music in the course of the next hour, because that's the kind of place I'm in.
Brilliant. Fantastic. What a city. Let's start off talking about Manchester United. A very anxious Manchester United fan base throughout the last few weeks, to be honest, and that may well continue. We will sort of get a gauge of what you've heard and what you think about where United are at the moment. But let's start from the top on two sort of big stories well, one of them that never seems to go away. Mbeumo, the latest on that. We've had people saying it was deal done 2 weeks ago. I think yourself said you was expecting a medical last week. The way we look at it as fans is Man United haven't offered 60 million, which seems to be the price that Brentford wanted from the 1st of June. Is it that simple, or is there more to this?
I think there's an element of that, but Brentford are playing games too. So it's not just Manchester United. They're trying to be disciplined in the market. Jason Wilcox is prepared to also, remember, walk away from deals as well, even if they're close. But Brentford have this almost grandstanded 70 million number, which is not what I'm told a deal will be done for, nor is it a number that Manchester United recognise. But the day after Thomas Frank is the Spurs manager, suddenly Spurs allegedly bid 70 million. Denied by Spurs sources. Now it is true that Yoane Wissa has come on Tottenham's radar, and that's nothing directly to do with Manchester United. But Brentford sources say very clearly, we're not going to sell both. So again, it puts a bit of pressure on Manchester United. So they're dealing with a tough negotiator that is not only necessarily negotiating at the table, but using normal tricks, if you like, in the market. And Manchester United just don't want to pay this Manchester United tax and eventually get the deal done for 70 million. So the situation is Manchester United's desire was to get Mbeumo in for pre-season, which has now passed the 7th of July. The expectation was that they could reach a full agreement and get that medical done a few days ago. Deal is still close, but Manchester United won't pay this tax. And as a result, I think we've got this normal club to club where one side is trying to put pressure on, the other side is saying, we're going to keep silent and stick to our valuation. And I still expect them to meet halfway. 55 plus 7.5 million, not far off, but that's not 62.5 million, because the 62.5 million for Matheus Cunha is guaranteed to Wolves in 3 installments, whereas only 55 of the 62.5 million of Manchester United's last offer is actually going to be in the back pocket of Brentford. So now Manchester United either have to make those add-ons more gettable, in which case they might do the deal for between 62 and 65 million, or if they want to stick to that total valuation of 62.5 million, they may have to go a little bit higher, perhaps around 60 million with the guaranteed fee part. And at the moment, Brentford have left the ball in Manchester United's court. They're waiting for another offer. I don't think that next offer is going to be much higher than the last one. But if the structure is better, then I still expect the deal to get done.
Yeah, I think I'm just reading some of the chat there, and obviously I would echo this as well. I think many Man United fans understand that there is a Man United tax, but when you look at Alanga going for 55, and you referenced Cunha there going for 62.5 guaranteed, I think if you're Brentford, you're looking at that market, you've got every right to say you want 60, and it just feels like United have sort of wrapped themselves up in a very similar situation to what they have done for years. I mean, remember Harry Maguire, 80 million took about 7 weeks, and we still paid the 80 million. And it just feels like with the Wizza story, if Spurs swooped in and did Wizza for like 50 million or whatever, and then Brentford went, we're not selling Mbeumo, we've just wasted 7 weeks. And it just feels like I would love to have seen what would have happened if we'd just offered 60 million 3 weeks ago and whether this deal would be done. But you wonder why we're not doing that. Is it because we've got to sell before we do this? Is it pure? Is it financial? Because I actually think he is worth 60, which is weird. I'd normally side with United.
I think you're right. And I think that if hindsight shows Wissa going to Spurs and Mbeumo coming off the table as a result, or Brentford being even more difficult with their valuation, then Manchester United fans are going to say, we told you so. Why didn't you act quicker in the market? But sometimes when they've paid whatever it takes to get a player, it's ended up being a disaster. With Anthony, for example, the fee. Rasmus Højlund obviously still wants to try and stay at the club somehow. But either way, whether he succeeds or fails, they paid more than they wanted to there. And this pattern is what Manchester United are trying to change. So Jason Wilcox, therefore, is looking to be disciplined, not because of Mbeumo specifically, but because in that bigger picture, if the whole market sees this early in the window, that you just paid what it took again, then the next deal and the next deal that you do, the clubs will maintain their position because that's the reputation that you've developed. And the Saudi market find this a little bit, where clubs say your first, second and third offer are not your final offers. So we're just going to keep quoting you 5 to 10 million higher until eventually you give us what we want. And if Manchester United keep doing that, then this type of negotiation will impact other deals in the window. Then specifically with Mbeumo, I come back to what I've said before. My understanding was always they had about 100 million to spend quickly on 2 signings, in the same manner, really, that they did Mason Mount and Onana when they joined the club. So now, heading into this window, 62.5 million is Cunha. However, it's only the first instalment that you'll pay over those 3 years. The rest at the moment is on Mbeumo. And I think they're looking to try and be as disciplined as they can in case maybe they can add one more within that budget. So I think that's the real reason why Jason Wilcox is trying to set a different tone, to move away from having to bid 3, 4, 5 times. I don't think Manchester United with any player this window will go beyond a formal bid 3. And that's where we're at with Mbeumo at the moment. And then second of all, as I say, if they are to keep paying that 5 million more to get who they want through the door, whether at value or not, then it will always be 5 million more for every single signing, at which point, when you add that up cumulatively across a window, it's a lot of money that they don't want to spend. And then your point about Elanga, I think, is very fair. And this is the challenge, basically, with the window, that when you start, the selling club has all of the autonomy because there's so long in the window. So they quote a high price and buyers often wait. But if a buyer waits too long, then several other deals happen. And suddenly you've got a Kudos fee, you've got an Elanga fee, you might have a Noni Madueke fee. Not all of these players are identical to somebody like Bryan Mbeumo, but they're all attackers. They're all in excess of 55 million. And there are clubs that are willing to get those deals done quickly. So it's true, like you say, that now Brentford are going to turn around and say, we've waited and waited and waited. And now we've got 3 other examples of why the deal is still around 60, 65 million, which is why I think Manchester United will eventually make a third bid that matches the valuation that Brentford are looking for. But they are going to have to be quick because, like you allude to, if Spurs end up moving for Wissa, it puts a completely different complexion on the transfer, because I'm still told that Brentford won't be looking to lose both of those attackers in the same window.
Yeah, you can understand that. We'll talk about strikers now, but I think that what it comes down to essentially is the ability of Manchester United to understand the market. And we know that Jason Wilcox is relatively inexperienced, and we know that Favel is a young player recruit, and I think they're going to be good, but they're also learning on the job to a certain extent. And I think Branthwaite last year, they got it right. They put 2 bids in. Everton wanted silly money and they walked away. I think with this one, they're probably following the same path, but I think a lot of people think that, in hindsight, they're going to be paying what they could have paid weeks ago. With the striker situation, we've had the Delap scenario. That's obviously a player that Man United wanted. Gyökeres looks like he's going to go to Arsenal. I know there's reports this morning, but it would be incredible if Man United got back into that. I think that will happen. Osimhen is clearly, as you've always said, it's a financial thing. He's not coming to any Premier League club because he's going to earn very big money in Galatasaray or Saudi, which leaves this market now for Manchester United where, incredibly, some people are saying maybe we won't sign a striker, even though the club has. If the club didn't buy a striker now, Ben, they've put their flag to the mast so obviously that they wanted one. You can't then go, oh, actually, we'll get by with what we've got. Watkins, Vardy, Callum Wilson, Calvert-Lewin. What are you hearing around strikers with United at the moment? And we're clearly not in any concrete talks with anybody. It seems to be Mbeumo and exits.
Yeah, exactly. And Mbeumo exits, and then they'll focus on the number 9. And I think there's more urgency for Mbeumo because although he's not a different and replacement for that number 9, he still adds goals. So they'll want to get those goals in early that he brings. then they can focus on their number 9. And they'll have to resolve the Rasmus Højlund situation as well. I think Manchester United have to drive that simply because Højlund is perfectly happy to stay at the football club and fight for his place. If you sell him permanently, it's a book loss, which means it might have to be a loan potentially with an option. But United actually have to inform Højlund, look, we're adding another number 9. And it'll be interesting to see how long that process takes, because Højlund won't want to be left with too much uncertainty or in any kind of limbo either, because that's not a good look as you head off towards America and your pre-season tour. Then other name-wise, we know they've inquired for Hugo Ekitike. Frankfurt are basically fueling everything. They're lighting a match to anybody that even breathes around a conversation with Hugo Ekitike because they want their 100 million. But Manchester
Feels like
United,
they've got a search net on Google. If anyone searches Ekitike and they locate it's Manchester, it must be Man United.
Yeah, exactly. And people are reading a lot into the noise when actually there's not much in that at the moment, simply because all of the potential suitors are thinking that price is going to drop to maybe 80, 85 million euros. But even for Manchester United, that's a heck of a lot of money that they don't have at the moment. I think what will happen with Ekitike is if Liverpool find out in the next days or weeks that the door is totally shut on Alexander Isak, and that's what I sense they're waiting for, then they will turn their attention to Hugo Ekitike. They'll do it discreetly. In the meantime, we'll hear a lot of noise about Chelsea, Manchester United, Arsenal if they don't get Victor Gyökeres, but I'm not so sure that things are advanced with any of those clubs. So the price would have to drop significantly for Hugo Ekitike if Manchester United are to enter the race. But it's true, they made a call, but clubs make calls over hundreds of players. Victor Gyökeres is in these advanced talks with Arsenal. Sporting are waiting for another bid, which could come imminently. 65 million euros plus 15 was Arsenal's perspective. Sporting want more gettable add-ons, and they just want 5 million more up front. So 70 plus 10 is kind of the asking price. Let's see if that gets done in the next few days. Arsenal are still optimistic, even though it's perhaps gone a little bit slower over the last 72 hours than they were hoping for. And with Manchester United and Gyökeres, important to mention that Victor Gyökeres never said no to Manchester United. He still is, if something falls through, open to joining Manchester United without Champions League football. And that's the part that always gets pulled out of context on social media. And suddenly you get told you're saying it's advancing. But Gyökeres indicating that never meant that Manchester United made an approach to Sporting. So we've never had yet a Manchester United conversation with Sporting. No bid. It's never advanced further than the player camp simply saying, if Arsenal doesn't come off, we would also be open to Manchester United. And the ball has always been in Manchester United's court, and they've not escalated that to any kind of club-to-club talk. So it's never been anything to get over excited about, other than the fact that if this Arsenal deal doesn't come off, Gyökeres wants to move to the Premier League and remains open to Manchester United. Ollie Watkins is a really interesting one. There's still a possibility that Aston Villa consider a sale, even though they feel more PSR compliant. And he is a name that Manchester United have discussed in more concrete detail internally. I think the asking price will still be about 60 million quid. So again, contingent on outgoings. Dominic Calvert-Lewin has offered himself to Manchester United. There's been no reciprocation yet. The wage is still very high with Calvert-Lewin, which is why I think it unlikely that Manchester United will move now. Probably more a late window. Is he still a free transfer? Have you got somebody else in who's a little bit younger? Then do you take a gamble on Calvert-Lewin, but high wage and also concerns over the injury record. Same can be said for Newcastle United. Nothing in Manchester United and Jamie Vardy. Nothing in Callum Wilson and Manchester United yet, other than, again, the fact that both of those agencies have reached out to Manchester United and said, these are two players, proven Premier League experience, that are available. But I think Manchester United, if they go down that route, will get in a younger or more big money player. And then if they feel there's opportunism for a free transfer in addition, that could come later in the window, contingent on outgoings first. But I don't think we'll see a scenario where it's only DCL, Vardy or Wilson if they did choose to proceed, because that feels a little bit underwhelming. And if the outgoings go according to plan, they will still generate budgets to be able to spend on a bigger name number 9. It's just going to come a bit later in the window.
60 million for Watkins is crazy. I do like him, but I mean, I understand why Villa would ask it. Again, it goes back to what you were saying at the very start, isn't it? The market, the more you move towards the end of it, what people don't realise is teams like Brentford, Aston Villa aren't just asking for a price for Mbeumo or Watkins. They've then got to operate in the market to bring in replacements themselves. So, and also it won't be long before, probably technically we already are. If you think about June the 1st to July the 10th, how many weeks is that? And then you go July the 10th to August the 31st. We might be not far off the distance between now and the closure of the market and how long we've been working with Mbeumo. So it gets into that period where people will just ask for silly money and be very, very interesting. It feels like we're going to have to, well, the club have said this, to be fair, we're going to have to fund moves. You've always said yourself about the goalkeeper situation. Just before we talk about exits, the goalkeeper situation, Onana's back. There are goalkeepers out there, Emi Martinez, Costa, but it looks like United have parked that and gone, that's not something we're going to have time to do this summer, even though it's very clear that it would be an area that Amorim Wilcox would probably be looking at based on a new manager normally has their own goalkeeper. But it doesn't, I've got no confidence in that now, Ben. It looks like, time's going to defeat us anyway.
Yeah, goalkeepers are always interesting because if you look for a goalkeeper, don't get a goalkeeper, then it gets rewritten as we never wanted a goalkeeper because it's not a position that you tend to rotate. And therefore, you can see a scenario where now or in the next few weeks, as pre-season starts, if they persist with Onana, it suddenly becomes, we never even looked at a goalkeeper. It was all just media talk. And I think you do that, like Chelsea did with Mike Maignan, in order to give confidence to the goalkeeping group, simply because you alternate a whole lot less. And it can be quite demoralizing if your number one goalkeeper in Onana feels like he's only the number one because they couldn't get another deal over the line, and then spends the entire season thinking, am I going to get dropped or am I going to be replaced in January? Situation with goalkeeper is Manchester United haven't informed Onana that he's surplus to requirements, which again, I would expect until such point in time comes where they actually find a concrete replacement. So Onana is only focused on Manchester United. He's not looking to leave. He's not been told he wants to leave. And at the moment, that all seems very genuine because they're not advancing on another name. The Emi Martinez situation, as I reported, was that Martinez was keen on a move to Manchester United. Same can be said for Atletico Madrid. But first Onana has to leave, or at Atleti, Jan Oblak has to depart. And if either of those scenarios don't happen, then as far as those two clubs are concerned, it's an absolute non-starter. And I don't see a situation where Man United buy an established number one and still have Onana at the club and then use that as almost leverage to force him out. It will be very much communicated to Onana first that he is going to be dropped, and then they'll go very aggressively in the market. And that simply hasn't happened. So it does look like they're going to stick with Onana for now. And remember, this isn't really a U-turn. The U-turn was in thinking, do we need a number one? And that is also where they discussed Costa too. But the original plan as of really September last year and certainly January was let's find a young number two because of the situation of Bayindir wanting to leave. And they may still bring in a young number two. And this is where, for example, John at Botafogo is a concrete target, but he's not young at all. He's 29, but he counts as quite young for a goalkeeper and would be prepared to be likely a backup or competition for Onana. You had Joan Garcia, who is genuinely young for a goalkeeper. He's somebody that wanted to be a number one. He went to Barcelona, therefore. Jordi Petrovic wants to be a number one. Manchester United would have entered that conversation if Petrovic had said he was prepared to be a number two. Looks like he's off to Bournemouth now, again, as a starting goalkeeper. And that's the kind of challenge, really. A lot of the young profiles that Manchester United thought might be ready in a year or two want to be number ones right now. So they didn't continue those conversations. John is the most interesting one at 29. You could argue he's either competition for Onana or just a number two, but he will want some sort of game time and minutes. So let's see whether that one develops. But for now, it looks like Onana is going to start the season as the number one, and that probably ends all of the talk of Emi Martinez joining, even though the player very keen.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We've spoken about it a lot, where Man United obviously are very different to other clubs, and I think maybe at a Man City or an Arsenal, where you've got the freedom of the market, you've got the Champions League money, you can make it a calculated risk where you buy your goalkeeper now, make it very clear to Onana that he's not the number one, and then sort of say to Onana with 6 weeks to go, you better go and find yourself a club because you're not going to play. United don't have that financial freedom, rightly or wrongly, and therefore we get into this situation, Ben, where players still do have power at Manchester United. We've seen Marcus Rashford this week back at Carrington training on his own. Many of us see that as another example of a game of chess that's going on between Amorim and Rashford. Amorim has obviously called him out previously. Rashford's done interviews. Amorim doesn't want him at the training ground. Rashford turns up at the training ground. And it will be asked about in every press conference on pre-season. You've got Garnacho, who's just put an Instagram post out on a plane saying coming. Anthony's not gone yet. Sancho was going to Juventus, and then it was reported this morning that that's not as concrete. Real struggles as we talk about the exits. Garnacho, there was this fake quote from it. We discussed it this morning. It was actually in the Mirror, the Manchester Evening News. Apparently, it's a fake quote from the Napoli president. I think Napoli were looking at Garnacho, but I was talking about Chelsea the other day, and loads of Chelsea fans were saying, we don't want him. We won't go anywhere near him. He's the player that's going to bring the most money in. So let's start with Garnacho. Where do we feel the Garnacho story is going to go? 20 years of age. I think he's a very good talent. I think he's misguided, the Villa shirt on Instagram, etc. But I would have thought there'd be clubs queuing up for a player like him at what's probably going to be a 45 million package, including add-ons and then a significant sell-on fee. I thought there would be more interest.
Yeah, I think there will be as the price drops throughout the window. Manchester United want 60 million at the moment. That was the same price in January. It could drop to 55. But again, you're looking at all these other attackers, left, right or centre, all going for between 55 and 65. And Manchester United will be ultimately saying what Brentford are speaking about at the moment regarding Mbeumo, that we're going to stick to our price as the window progresses. Or if they line up concrete targets and think, well, now we're just going to take the money, different story. And that's a good example of West Ham and Kudos, where they didn't really want to sell to Spurs. They didn't really want to sell for under 60 million, but they got good payment terms. And eventually they say, okay, if we take 55, at least we can get going. And maybe that's the perspective of Manchester United. Just before we get into Garnacho, it's worth setting a bit of context about Ruben Amorim versus potentially players that are going to dig in their heels. And I think it's worth noting a story that I broke a few years ago now. Islam Slimani, who used to be at Leicester, was a sporting legend. He returned to the club under Ruben Amorim. Amorim didn't want him, wasn't impressed by his attitude, thought he'd come back to kind of just chance it, milk a bit of the glory, play on his own terms and so on. And Amorim really quickly was unhappy with his application in training. So he demoted Slimani to the reserve team, and it caused a lot of outrage in the dressing room, originally in the fan base as well, because Slimani was a sporting legend. He then went to the sporting president and said, it's me or him. And the sporting president said, of course, we're going to back you. And Slimani never played for the football club again. So don't underestimate Ruben Amorim versus a player or players, because he's been given the same sort of mandate from Omar Barada, Jim Ratcliffe and so on, and Jason Wilcox, to go and put his foot down. And if Ruben Amorim says to a player, your future at Manchester United is over, then their future at Manchester United is over, as long as he's the manager. I don't think we're going to see players somehow force their way back into the reckoning or outstay their welcome, because there is that empowerment. And that's the sort of irony, that the veto that Ten Hag had in the market has been taken away, but the veto in football decisions has been firmly put on Amorim's shoulders. And if you look at that Slimani situation, you understand that Amorim is not going to be overpowered by anybody turning up to training or doing things via the media. Then coming back to Garnacho, Villa is still one to watch. They want to strengthen on that left-hand side. They've lost, obviously, a few versatile attackers like Rashford and Asensio. There's some suggestions that Asensio has entered into talks with Turkish clubs. And I think Villa want to find a solution to bring in an important left-sided player. Now they're PSR compliant and they're into the new financial year. That may be a possibility. Garnacho would like to stay in the Premier League. Chelsea feels like a non-starter because they've signed Jamie Gittins. Napoli's not advancing in any way, but they do still want to sign a left-sided player. I think Georgi Sudakov at Shakhtar is the other one to watch there. But Garnacho's priority, I'm told, is not to go to Italy, not to go to Turkey, not to go to Saudi. If he can, his first preference is to stay in the Premier League, and Villa remains one to watch.
Yeah, interesting. Well, he's worn the kit already, so he'll have won over some Villa fans.
Yeah, he's used to the kit.
On that kit was Marcus Rashford. The things have moved positively for Rashford, although we're hearing that Luis Diaz wants to leave. That might be Bayern, because Barcelona aren't that cash rich. Nico Williams obviously looked like he was going, and then he isn't. Rashford's done everything he can, apart from, running around the new camp in a Barcelona kit. He literally has been there. He's done interviews with YouTubers over there. He's spoken about Thierry Henry would be in his icon and all this stuff, but he's still back training on his own at Carrington. And again, I think it probably goes back to the wage and the contract that he's got, because it's, I would say, I've said so many times, if I was like Brighton or an Aston Villa, I'd take Rashford. I still think there's a good player there, but the price is prohibitive, and he seems to be locked in on Barcelona, and they're a very difficult club to deal with at the best of times. What do we think with Rashford? Do you think he's just going to be there till the end of the market, training on his own, which isn't good for him when he wants to be in England squads and the World Cup?
Yeah, exactly. There's more urgency. I think now we're into July. So June, I was always told, was a period of deliberation and club seeking, as opposed to an expectation I think would get done. Rashford leaning towards going abroad. He wants Champions League. And some of that is, as you rightly say, with a view to the 2026 World Cup, because Thomas Tuchel's not like Gareth Southgate. He'll pick players he thinks can win that tournament in 2026, regardless of age. There's no long-term planning and prioritising youth. So the likes of Rashford or Jordan Henderson are going to stand real opportunities. The same can obviously be said for Harry Maguire as well. Rashford wants Barcelona. He's somewhat waiting for Barcelona. And it's true that his future may be intertwined with Luis Diaz if, and it's still a big if, Liverpool actually sell. Because remember, in the last 2 weeks, they've told Bayern not for sale. They've told Barca not for sale. And there might be a situation where one of those two clubs gets Diaz and then the other escalates their pursuit of Marcus Rashford. Even if Barca got Diaz, we might be back where we were before, that they're prepared to do Rashford in a more central position, but only on a loan. But right now, Manchester United are doing the same things that all of these other clubs are doing to Manchester United, that are frustrating the heck out of the fan base. And that's the sort of irony of the window. And it always makes me chuckle a little bit, because I get a lot of, how can Brentford stick to their guns over a 62 to 65 million price? But Manchester United are sticking to their guns over this 40 million price for Marcus Rashford, because we're still early in the window. And I'm sure there's a Spanish Mark Goldbridge doing a parallel universe show with a tanned Ben Jacobs, and that fan base in the chat are going, how dare Manchester United stick to a 40 million price? But this is the stage of the
I would agree with
them
on that. I would agree with them on that, to be fair. I would say, yeah, with those wages, it's a deadlock, isn't it? And it's interesting how it's going to change. We'll go back to some incomings, but the Jadon Sancho situation. I mean, I think Anthony is quite straightforward. It's looking like Betis, and they've just got to work on something there. I've got no issues with that. But the Sancho one it's just strange, Ben. I mean, we hear about swaps with Douglas Luiz. We hear about £25 million. And I just look at the situation and I go, but this is a player who's got a good wage for one more year, and then he's a free agent. Why would he take a pay cut to help Man United get a transfer? Is there anything more to it that we're missing on this? Because the Sancho situation is a weird one.
Yeah, I think the Sancho situation is so different to Rashford, because 40 million seems high to suitors. Although remember, Barcelona are about to trigger a release clause for Nico Williams. They couldn't register him, but they showed their hand that they've at least got 58 million euros, and 40 million is less than that. So Man United will point to that. With Sancho, it's different, because 25 million, which was the top end of the obligation that Chelsea decided to override, is actually seen as his market value, if not below it. So there's no issue there with the transfer fee, but it's all about agreeing terms with Sancho. And the oddity is that Chelsea were prepared to keep Sancho. They basically offered him their part of the wage contribution. So you may remember that Manchester United were paying some of those Sancho wages, roughly £120,000, and Chelsea were basically paying the other 180 to 200k. And then Chelsea went to Sancho and said, we'll match that contribution on a permanent deal. And Sancho said no. So we know to join his next club, he's looking for in excess of 180 to 200,000 pounds a week. Maybe it's true he wants his full Manchester United wage, but I do think that he'll be a little bit flexible because he'll know that only Saudi would be able to match that wage. So we're now in a situation where Sancho is the one that is the roadblock. Manchester United negotiations will be relatively smooth. We've heard reports of Napoli and more recently Juventus, but they haven't actually made an offer to Manchester United. Fenerbahce made an inquiry. There were reports in Turkey. They made an offer. Not true, to my understanding. Nothing advanced between Fenerbahce and Sancho. So he's waiting. There's Saudi interest. You've got Al Qadsiya and Al Ali and very possibly Neom FC, because all three have made internal inquiries to the central deal makers saying this is a player we quite like. But Sancho 12 months ago said no to Saudi Arabia when Al Ittifaq came calling. So the irony is, if he wants his wage, he can do the deal very quickly in Saudi. If he doesn't go to Saudi, he's not going to get his wage. And then it's all on the player to make some concessions. And at the moment, those concessions are not low enough to get either Juventus or Napoli to bite.
It's interesting you said that, because I don't think, I probably missed it, but I don't think the chat have, that 180k was probably what Chelsea offered him then. And that is amazing, really, when you consider the fact that if he's looking for more than that, I would say, and I think most people would agree, he's not worth it. He's asking for a wage he's not worth, but unfortunately, he is being paid a lot more than that by Manchester United. And in a year's time, he probably could get that because there'd be no transfer fee. But yeah, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. I think it's again, it's another footballer who's not going to get a pre-season and is going to be waiting around. And but some of them think of it like that.
I think also, Mark, just briefly, you might see a situation because of his contractual situation where Sancho feels he can get this wage for another year on another loan if he just digs in, wait for Manchester United to bring in funding from other outgoings. Then if they get 2 or 3 fees, they might be more flexible. I think Anthony's the same, by the way, probably feeling like if he delays a little bit, a loan to Betis might be possible if other important fees are being brought in. But not all these players can play the same game, because if Rashford's waiting for a Barca loan, Anthony's waiting for a Betis loan, Sancho's waiting for a loan somewhere, and then he can ultimately leave and get the wage he's looking for, then each player is ultimately delaying and Manchester United aren't getting anything done. There is a situation, though, where if, and let's just call it Rashford Garnacho in the hypothetical, if Manchester United brought in 2 important fees, 50-60 Garnacho, 30-40 for Rashford, then at that point, I do think they will be more understanding of potentially the Anthony situation, especially if Betis are prepared to commit to an option to buy. So this is why I think players like Sancho and Anthony are waiting, because they feel later in the window, they might just get that stopgap loan that they're looking for that could eventually lead to a permanent move that suits them.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you this question anyway. A couple of people are asking about Ndidi and Estebanan, but I want to ask you first, at what point do you think, is there any sense in the market that this is going to change? Because it has been going on for a few weeks now with no sales and no Mbeumo and no striker. I think it's 2 weeks United are going to be in the States on tour. Very little seems to happen when we go on tour traditionally, and then you're straight into a new season. So the Arsenal game, we would hope to have Mbeumo in. But do you see there's going to be a point where it just starts happening, or does it feel like it's just going to be this game of chess that everybody's playing?
No, I think there will be another push. Whether or not things get over the line obviously depends on the negotiations. But if you look at the market more broadly, Liverpool did all their business early. Reason for that is because they closed their financial year on May the 31st, very intentionally, because they feel PSR compliant by quite some distance and they'd stocked up funds. But that's an underrated point, because Liverpool wouldn't be moving like they did if their financial year ended on the 30th of June. By being able to close it early, you're putting all of these outlays onto the next financial year, and there'll still be some outgoings for Liverpool too. Manchester United were always kind of waiting for the 1st of July. Even the Cunha deal contractually doesn't start until the 1st of July. I know it was announced in June, but that allows Manchester United to put the first instalment onto the next financial year. Now, if you look at, for example, Arsenal trying to get Gyökeres over the line, signing Norgard, Tottenham moving for Mohamed Kudus, bids and deals are getting done in the next few days. because clubs are making a push to see if they can get these players in either for their first day of pre-season or alternatively before they get on a plane for whatever their pre-season tour is. And that's why I think the next few days for Manchester United business, incomings and outgoings, will give us a little bit more clarity, because there is still that push to see if anything is possible in a disciplined way and without being reckless. But I don't think Manchester United is just going to nonchalantly board a plane with everything as is. I think the next few days before they go will shed a bit more light on the direction of travel, including hopefully some clarity on that Mbeumo deal.
Yeah, because I mean, I know you speak about Liverpool there and the intelligence of that, but as we know, so many Liverpool players are going to be there training now. I don't know when they are back in training, obviously because of what the tragedy that happened last week. There may be some delay on that, but yeah, so they've got those players in, and it's such an important pre-season. We all know that Ruben Amorim has a very distinctive style of play that didn't work with this set of players last year. So you would want these players in, but it just doesn't seem to go hand in hand with the United transfer strategy of they're not going to rush. As Sir Jim Ratcliffe said, we'll walk to the right decision, we're not going to run to the wrong one. But it doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with Amorim, and it certainly doesn't go hand in hand with playing the top 4 teams in England in your first 8 games. So yeah, I think there's a lot of fans, myself included, that are just going, look, it's all right going to the States, it's all right doing pre-season, but there needs to be more coming in and more going out. More left field. Is there any other sort of, you mentioned Ndidi and Esteban on previous shows. I saw Brighton actually bought a left back, didn't they? A Belgian left back, was it last week? So do we still think that they are possibles, left field sort of signings?
Yeah, Estupiñán is certainly a player that Manchester United like. They've not made any kind of approach yet to Brighton, but that's an area where Ruben Amorim would like to strengthen with an athletic fullback, so it could still be one to watch. With Wilfred Ndidi, I think it falls into the same category as perhaps Dominic Calvert-Lewin, where later in the window, if he's still at Leicester and they're looking for a more economical option, they could move. There has been some contact. You have got Real Betis, Juventus, Everton and Manchester United for Ndidi, and the player would be open to Saudi, I'm told, as well. The challenge, like with Calvert-Lewin, is 9 million relegation release clause. Sounds like a great number, but actually his wage is really high. So everyone that's made an inquiry, even Saudi, are trying to do that deal if they can for more like 5 million. And right now, I think Manchester United don't see it as a priority. So is he still going to be a Leicester player by the time they might see it as a priority? Let's see. But there's a lot of other clubs that are holding talks as well. I know that they've discussed Frank Onyeka as well, somebody else that they think might be economical and a squad player. But I'm not so sure now Norgod's gone to Arsenal that deal is going to be a possibility. And with Onyeka, you've got Valencia and Burnley who are also interested. And that's another signing again where Manchester United are saying, is there a kind of a squad player that, like Norgard to Arsenal, won't necessarily get everyone crazily excited, but will do the job and will fit into this system? So let's see whether they move. Outgoings are going to be really important there. I get asked a lot about Rios. I've seen him a lot during the Club World Cup. Is a player that Manchester United have scouted during this tournament. Nothing more than that at this stage. Few people asking about Edison. Going to be difficult because I'm not so sure that Atlanta want to sell. And again, Manchester United are not advancing at this stage. So people want to know about that midfield in particular, whether box to box or more defensive minded. But I still think we're in a situation where Manchester United think Kobbie Mainoo is going to stay. Ruben Amorim, contrary to some suggestions, really likes Manuel Ugarte and thinks he's the kind of athletic profile that can really play a key role next season. So not a priority at this stage, but we definitely can't discount another midfielder coming to the football club between now and the end of the window. It's just a case, again, even though I sound like a broken record, of outgoings first. And then as soon as they've got budget, Mbeumo trying to get it over the line, number 9, the next priority, and everything else will likely have to wait.
It's like a lot of things, isn't it, Ben? The goalkeeper, we can't remove one to get one. And in the midfield as well, you would ideally, I mean, we know they've tried to get Casemiro gone for the certainly last summer, January. And I think he's 1 year out now. He's doing an Eriksen and a Lindelof, isn't he? He's back in the World Cup squad for Brazil. He's on a very big wage. And yeah, I just don't see a midfielder coming in when you've got what you said: Agate, Bruno, Mainu, Casemiro, Collier. You're not in Europe. And this is the problem with the goalkeeper as well. If you bring a backup goalkeeper, where do you give them game time? Really, you haven't got enough games. So there just seems to be that certain areas are closed off because we can't move people on. We're almost this long project, which I'm very concerned about when you think about the Super League and how much money is in, not the Super League, I call it the Super League, the Champions League. So much money for being in that. We've seen the spending power of Chelsea, Man City, Liverpool and Arsenal. And I do worry that United could get left further behind because they just seem to be stuck in this traffic jam.
Yeah, and that is just the nature of football. Liverpool are going to be stronger, Arsenal are going to be stronger, Chelsea are going to be stronger. Even some teams that were equally as poor as Manchester United, like Spurs, might be stronger because they have got Champions League and money to spend. And this is why I think the two priorities in Cunha and if Mbeumo comes off, the Brentford attacker, are to find proven, ready now Premier League players and sources of goals, because then you also feel that you've instantly improved. And if you had exactly the same season as last campaign, just with Cunha and Mbeumo, even if Højlund, Xerxes remain your option for number 9, Ruben Amorim probably immediately feels like you got more points in the bag, but probably not enough points to go from where they finished to into the top 4. So this is where another number 9 is going to be very key. And then just Amorim working with what he's got. And I do think that's an underrated point in all of this. Yes, everyone gets excited about the window. And yes, hearing Manchester United have got a 5-window plan is not that exciting because there's urgency now. And even if Ratcliffe says he's got a 5-window plan and is kind of mirroring the Chelsea ownership messaging, in Chelsea ownership's first, second, third and fourth windows, they spent because they were in a position to do so. Manchester United can't do what Chelsea have done and just chuck $1 billion down over the next 2 or 3 windows. So they are very different kinds of projects. But the underrated point in all of this is just Ruben Amorim said to Manchester United when he interviewed for the job, he didn't want to take it mid-season. He didn't want to have the kind of hangover post Ten Hag. He didn't want to work with a squad when he didn't have a summer window. And now, even though he took the job because they said, well, take it or leave it. We're Manchester United. You join now or we're going for another candidate. So he said, okay, against my better judgment, Manchester United is too good to turn down. But now this is the first summer of Ruben Amorim's. There's no excuses. There's no bullishness anymore about criticizing the squad and saying it's the worst Premier League team in history and all of that. I think that was Amorim basically making it clear through the media that if it was up to him, he wouldn't have even been Manchester United manager last season. So now there is a blank slate and we have to understand what kind of marginal gains and what kind of benefit to next season can simply be got with the squad that already exists just by Amorim having that pre-season, coupled with whoever, of course, joins. And that's the part I'm going to find most intriguing. Is Amorim actually able to work his managerial magic to improve this squad regardless of what they do in the market? Because obviously if he isn't, it's going to be same old story. And then Manchester United will be in big, big trouble.
Yeah, essentially he's got to make do with what he's got at the moment. And that's an incredible backstep for Manchester United, who have financially backed every manager that's come in their first summer. So, yeah, going to be very interesting. Absolutely fantastic, Ben. Very nice. I know Beth normally does it. She's on her holidays, sunning it up, but I get the benefit of spending an hour talking with yourself, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. I hope I've not been a bad substitution for Beth for yourself. And
you've been a great substitution.
Enjoy Stoke, sorry, New York. Enjoy New York, which I'm sure is. I presume it's very hot there as well.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy, like 33 degrees, but it gives you two temperatures, what it is and what it feels like. So it feels like 36 at the moment, and obviously that's had a very interesting impact on these games. I'll be here for the Club World Cup final, Chelsea against PSG, and then of course Manchester United will taste some of this weather in America as well. Just also worth noting, actually, because a lot of people ask me about this, so I said that I'd bring it up before I go. We heard the reports yesterday about Manchester United strengthening their recruitment network, if you like. And this is actually being done by a consultancy firm in New York called Sportsology. And loads of people were saying, wait a minute, we're adding senior recruitment people mid-window. So does that not mean that they're either going to come in after the window or during the window? And then how can you do business if you don't have the people? I think it's really important to note Jason Wilcox is running the show with Chris Vivell, the most senior recruitment person coming in, reports to Vivell, but is basically a chief scout, which of course does impact your summer, but they are the coordinator of the global talent pool. So their job is basically going to be to say, have we got scouts in the right place? Have we got enough data? Are we using the data effectively? Are we watching the right players? Are we developing relationships with the families of those players for likely longer term signings? And then in most kind of football networks, you then have a technical director involved that's also aware of who might come in, particularly in the sort of 16-year-olds you might sign when you're 18, or 18 to 21-year-olds that could either be first teamers or in your under 23s or under 21s. But these roles are not work in this window, get deals done now. It's very much about Vivell and Wilcox, and therefore whether they hire today or at the end of the window, I don't think it will have any bearing whatsoever on this summer.
Which is not a very good one at the moment anyway. So yeah, it makes no difference. Thank you, Ben. Absolute legend. Thanks everyone who's tuned in live and who isn't watching live. Get your comments in as always. And we'll speak to you next week, Ben.
Look forward to it. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.